Hello, this is Craig Wesco recording for TCGplayer.com, and today we're going to play a tribal cat green-white deck in Standard. So, I'm going to have some fun today. We're playing with all these sweet new cats in the new set. So, Hour of Devastation isn't just about devastation, it's also about cats. So, Pride Sovereign, one of the new cards that really stands out. You can exert it to make additional 1/1 lifelink cats, or it just gets gigantic when you have more cats on the battlefield. Another new one is Adorned Pouncer, which is kind of innocuous. It's just, 1/1 double strike for 2, not that threatening. But then after it dies, it comes back as a 4/4 double striker for 5 mana. So that thing hits really hard when it comes back. Another new card, kind of new card, not from Hour of Devastation, but from Amonkhet, which hasn't really seen any play until now, is Sacred Cat. So not quite up to par as far as just the stats. 1/1 lifelink and Balm comes back as a 1/1. But now that we have all these cat synergies, it's just good enough. So speaking of cat synergies, Regal Caracal is the other one. So another Amonkhet card that hasn't really seen the light of day because there's not enough incentive for it. But now that we have Adorned Pouncer and Pride Sovereign, this one really shines. So Regal Caracal, I played it in the Naya cat deck in Modern, and it was actually pretty effective. It's really hard to beat a resolved Regal Caracal, but it is what it is. It works really well with Pride Sovereign. Pride Sovereign can shoot out bigger creatures because of the Caracal bonus, or if you play the Caracal, the Pride Sovereign gets even bigger because you make 3 more cats. So they work really well together, and they're supported by the same types of cards. So Longtusk Cub is another cat that I played. It's all play in the energy deck. We're not really an energy deck. We're just playing Attune with Ether as a way to just, pump the cub and fix our mana. But Metallic Mimic is the other cat tribal card. So we're going to name cat almost every time. Sometimes we name ally for Gideon, but most of the time we're going to be naming cat because all of our other creatures are cats. So it's kind of like the white Anafenza, where you just play the Metallic Mimic first, and then all of your other cats get a bonus. The zombie deck also plays this card for a similar reason. And it works really well with cards like Regal Caracal and Pride Sovereign, which they make tokens, and the tokens enter the battlefield with the bonus. So that's a pretty neat interaction. Gideon can be an emblem to Anthem the team, which is really effective with all these cats, especially the cat tokens. It's also just a legitimate threat. So one of the only ways to really clean up a board that has some cats and a Regal Caracal is to wrath the board with a card like Fumigate. So having a Planeswalker ready to rebuild the board can be effective in a lot of scenarios. And then sometimes you're antheming to get the creatures out of range of something like Sweltering Suns. So Gideon is just kind of a multi-purpose card, just one of the best cards in Standard, so it just really fits into the deck. Then a couple of the sort of pieces that just also work synergistically with the deck. One is Prepare to Fight. So Prepare to Fight does a few things. One, it's essentially a removal spell, the fight half, and we have enough big creatures like Gideon and Caracal and Pride Sovereign, and just to do some damage fighting, especially when you cast both halves in the same turn. But also Prepare does some really interesting things. So one is when you put it on an Adorned Pouncer, it gets double the amount of damage because it's double strike. So you just cast it on the Pouncer, and that's 6 damage worth of lifelink in one hit. So that's a pretty big surprise and really does some damage. And when it's eternalized, instead of attacking for 8, you are attacking for 12 points of lifelink, which is pretty significant. Another thing it does is you can do tricks with Pride Sovereign. So you exert the Pride Sovereign to make 2 tokens, and then they attack you with their creatures or whatever, thinking that you're just going to chump block with your tokens, and then you prepare to untap the Pride Sovereign, and then block and gain a bunch of life, and then you tap it again to exert to make 2 more guys. So, or cats. And so the synergy there, then you untap, and then you fight the Pride Sovereign on their blocker, and you just completely decimated their board. So that's one of the interactions that makes Prepare to Fight, I think, good enough for this deck. The 2 new cards works really well in conjunction with them. And it's also a way to get Regal Caracal out of things like a Braid range. It's kind of like a Blossoming Defense for 1 extra mana, and then you get this fight card in the graveyard, which can be really effective. So that's basically the main deck. The mana is pretty straightforward. I might end up cutting a forest for another plains, but it's pretty close to about what I'd want it to be. Given that we have 4 attunes, we're only on 22 lands, so it essentially feels like 26 lands, which is enough to cast like the Gideons and the Regal Caracals and stuff. Now in the sideboard, we have another land in case we bring in Fumigates and Ajani's, because a lot of the matchups where we want these cards, we also still want the Caracal. So in order to have that many 5-drops in our deck, we need another land. And also it's a good land for those matchups. Threatening to get Ormondal is pretty significant against any deck that's trying to Wrath our board, and just making tokens to recover after we've already like emblemed a Gideon or whatever can be really effective. And our removal spells are Stasis Snare to deal with cards like Avacyn, Torrential Gearhulk, stuff like that, Heart of Kirin, and Natural State can deal with things like Okitra's Monument. It can deal with Stasis Snare. It can deal with Dynavolt Tower. It can deal with just whatever the opponent's playing. Vehicles can deal with the Heart of Kirin. Just kind of enough targets for it. I'm not sure if it's better than Fragmentize, because really the only target that Fragmentize hits that this doesn't is Cast Out. But Cast Out might be popular enough to where I'd want to split it 1-1 or even 2-0. But I think Natural State is real close, and so I'm running that. Blossoming Defense is to protect our cats. Pride Sovereign and Regal Caracal are really important threats to protect. And also, just being able to pump an Adorned Pouncer has a similar effect to the Prepare to Fight, where it just gets 4 damage for 1 mana instead of just 2. So when that's your pump spell, it becomes a little bit more significant. And then we have Prowling Serpopard for any deck that's running counterspells, which I think a lot of decks are kind of gearing toward the control route. Now there's cards like Hour of Devastation and a Braid to really be a more controlling deck. So I think counterspells are kind of on the rise right now. It can't stop Spell Queller, but it can stop basically all the other counterspells from countering your creatures. And if they're just untapped, being like, okay, I'm going to counter whatever you do this turn, I'm just going to counter it as a tempo play. You play the Serpopard, they're like, oh, well, I guess I have to come up with a new game plan. It's kind of like Loxodon Smiter in that regard. I don't play it main deck because everyone's playing a Braid, and I don't want it against decks that play a Braid. But any deck with counter spells, it's good because all your creatures are uncounterable, and it's a cat, a 4/3 cat for 3, which is pretty good. And if you go turn 2 Mimic, turn 3 Serpopard, that's a 5/4 on turn 3. That's pretty effective. And then the last, or Fumigate, comes in against zombies and sometimes on the draw against decks that could just flood the board. We have a surprising amount of resiliency to recover from a Wrath because we have cards like Gideon that can survive the Wrath and rebuild quickly. We have Regal Caracal to just, you go Fumigate into Caracal and you have a very legitimate threatening board all of a sudden. And also we could bring back cards like Sacred Cat and Adorned Pouncer. So if I cast Fumigate, and then next turn I cast the Metallic Mimic from my hand, and then Embalm the Sacred Cat, suddenly I have like a 2/1 and a 2/2, and then the following turn I bring back the Adorned Pouncer that died in the Fumigate or whatever, and I get a 5/5 double striker. So you can really recover pretty quickly from a Fumigate. Then the final card is Ajani Unyielding, where, well, for one, this is a tribal cat deck, and how can you not play at least one copy of the cat planeswalker when it's green-white in your green-white cat deck. That's just blasphemy. So to avoid blasphemy, I'm going to play this Ajani Yielding, and I'm going to sideboard it in against decks that are trying to be slow. So some decks are control decks or whatever, mid-range decks that are just trying to, play the slow grindy game, and this is a great slow grindy card. And then a lot of decks are going to sideboard into a slower deck because we have so many creatures in our deck. So they're going to try to be the control deck, and this is going to be our trump. So hopefully it comes up. That would be really cool if it does. He's kind of the hero, but this deck, Tribal Cats, green-white, really fun. Let's see how it goes.